Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a large box of Raff. That is Joseph Joachim Raff, 1822 to 1882. Now, Raff was a Swiss composer who made his reputation, initially at least, as the assistant of Liszt, and he took credit for helping Liszt orchestrate his early orchestral works. He was very happy to take credit for that. Liszt was a little less happy to give him the credit for it, and there's a certain amount of controversy as to just how much Raff actually did to assist Liszt in arriving at his classic kind of screechy orchestration, because Raff's orchestration is really very, very good, and Liszt's was, shall we say, more personal, right? Anyway, the bottom line is that Raff wrote a pile of programmatic symphonies that were enormously popular in their day, and of course have absolutely no legs at all. I mean, no one cares about them now. And it's sort of easy to understand why. There's a lot of beautiful music in these works. They are colorful. They are very attractively scored, because Raff certainly knew how to do that, as we've just mentioned. But they are formally stiff as a board. Almost every single movement is too long by half, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, that doesn't mean you can't sit back and just enjoy it and not worry about it, but in terms of symphonic, the symphonic ethos of development and not one note too many or too little, Raff sort of flunks that test. But that said, it's very, very attractive music, and there's quite a bit of it. So I'm going to take you through the box here, the Raff box. This includes his symphonies and suites. There are at least 11 symphonies and a bunch of suites and overtures and orchestrations and other things. And this doesn't include his concertos, which are quite lovely. In fact, his piano concertos are gorgeous, and I recommend them very highly. And they've been recorded as part of this series. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk about them separately at some point. These performances feature Hans Stadelmayr with the Bamberg Symphony and the Bavarian State Philharmonic, and they're on the Tudor label, Swiss composer. Here it is. Thank goodness for those Swiss. They're supporting their local guy, and that's what matters. But I'll give you a good sense just to go through these discs. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them, just to get a sense of what Raff was doing musically and what his music attempts to describe. And then I can turn you loose to get either the box or separate issues, and we can talk about some of the works in a little bit more detail. But anyway, Symphony number 1, here it is, has a subtitle, An das Vaterland, to the fatherland. Now, was that a smart move on Raff's part? It really was, because this period in which he was writing, the 1850s and 60s and 70s, was the era of romantic nationalist ferment in Germany before unification in the early 1870s, right? So to write a symphony dedicated to the German fatherland was a ticket to fame, if not necessarily fortune. But this symphony was enormously popular in its day. It's enormously long. It's 68 minutes long. We tend to think that Bruckner was writing these long, bloated, crazy symphonies in the 1860s and 70s. He wasn't the only one. He really wasn't. I mean, length was happening everywhere with Wagner, with Liszt, and with Raff. And the thing about Raff is that he justifies his length to a certain extent by the programmatic content of the symphonies. That's the difference really between him and Bruckner. Bruckner was long and huge and bloated and non-programmatic and abstract, which is what sort of freaked people out, because they could sit through it. They could accept the length if there was a reason for it, a justification. That's why Bruckner's fourth. The Romantic was his most popular symphony, because it had at least an implied program, and people could say, well, that's why we're sitting through it for an hour and 10 minutes. It's supposed to be something happening, and here's the something. You know what I mean? So here we have this symphony in 5 movements. And oh wow, look at this. It's written. It's dedicated to Seiner Königlichen Hoheit dem durchblauchigsten Fürsten und Herrn Karl Alexander Großherzog von Sachsen, Weimar, Eisenach in tiefster Ehrfurcht gewidmet. Yeah, that means it's, dedicated to the highest, most exalted, fabulous majesty, the Duke or Count of Alexander, who is the high, big deal guy in Weimar, which is where Liszt was and where Raff was at the time. So here we have 5 movements which are not actually dedicated to specific programmatic themes, but that would soon change. This is 67 minutes, actually a fairly abstract music, but it's dedicated to the fatherland. It happens to be very lovely. And one of the things that I enjoy about Raff is that his scores were composed so that they could be played by sort of the provincial orchestras of the day. The scoring is not extremely extravagant. He doesn't use extra instruments. It's double winds. It's pretty straightforward. But he's a vibrato guy. He actually notates vibrato in his string parts every so often, which is very useful for people studying what performance practice of the period was. And I happen to have in the first symphony here, I have my score on Das Vaterland. And if you see, look at the first violin part, which is right where I put my finger here, you will see that he actually writes down that line should be played with vibrato. And then a little bit later on as well, he just writes vib. But you see that on these sustained notes in espressivo passages, and the entire passage, by the way, is marked to be played cantando con espressione, singing with expression. At the climax of phrases, he wants vibrato to be extremely audible, and he says so. And that is very, very helpful in dealing with the kooky HIP people who think that romantic music was largely played without any. Anyway, so that's the first symphony. The second symphony is a purely abstract symphony in 4 movements, but here it's coupled with the fabulous suite Aus Thüringen from Thuringia. You see, what people don't know is that Raff appeared on Wheel of Fortune game show, and he won a fabulous 2-day and 3-night stay in Thuringia at the Best Western Motel in Lower Thuringia. And he wrote a 5-movement suite that has an Elizabethan hymn and, of course, the dance of the gnomes and sylphs. That's why everyone went to Thuringia, right? To see the gnomes and the sylphs. And variations on a folk song, and of course, the Happy Peasant Festival, because there was nothing more happy than being a Thuringian peasant, right? I mean, usually when people write, suites to journeys to exotic lands, they find places that are a little bit more enticing than Thuringia. But I've been to Thuringia. It's nice enough, and maybe that was an exciting travel destination in Raff's day. I'm not going to complain about it. Next, oh, this is so romantic. This is Symphony number 3, Im Walde, in the woods. In the woods, which is a sort of, Eindrücke und Empfindungen, which is, Beethoven's introduction and happy feelings on arriving in the woods. Then the second part is in Dämmerung, in the twilight. It's got a Traumerei movement. Traumerei, right? And then the dance of the dryads. That's kind of similar to the gnomes and the sylphs. There's always like an elf or a gnome or a dryad or a something popping around the German Walde, we all know that. And then finally it ends with Nacht, even though you kind of, oh, wait a minute, look at this. This is a whole deal. Einzug und Auszug der wilden Jagd. Ooh, the crazy hunt with Frau Holde and Wotan. And then Daybreak. I mean, this gets a lot done in only 17 minutes. Oh my God, 17 minutes. See, that's the problem. Then there's an Italian suite. There we go. That's a little bit more like it, isn't it? Where you get an overture, a barcarolle. You got to have a barcarolle, an intermezzo, a notturno, and of course, the obligatory tarantella as a finale. Now, the Fourth Symphony is a purely abstract one in 4 movements, but this disc also comes with 4 overtures to Benedetto Marcello, Dama Kobold, which was actually very well known for a long time. It was sort of one of those hangers-on from Raff's output. People played this overture quite frequently, probably because it's only 6 minutes and 42 seconds long. Then the overture to Di Parola, and then something just called Concert Overture, Opus 123. You'd think he could have come up with a title, wouldn't you? Now, the Fifth, Leonore. This is the one symphony of his that kind of survives on the fringes of the repertoire. Remember, Bernard Herrmann made a recording of it. There were a bunch of them. There was one on Unicorn. It pops up every so often. The story of Leonore is the story of Leonore. It's the old, girl with the dead lover who comes back as a ghost and sticks her on a horse and rides off with her, and usually daybreak happens, or she prays to the Virgin, and the spirits are dispersed, or he gets her, it drags her down to hell. I mean, the story changes depending on who you did it. Dvorak's cantata, The Spectre's Bride, is basically the same story. It's a very, very popular myth in the day. It became operas and tone poems and all kinds of stuff based on this story. Even Franck's Le Chasse aux Maudits, The Accursed Huntsman, is kind of related to that theme. And then we have a suite number 1 for orchestra, and it's just a suite. That's all it is in 5 movements. It has an introduction in fugue, minuet, adagietto, scherzo, and a march. What could be bad? But the Leonore Symphony is the big one. It's 50 minutes long. And it really is long, especially the central march, which is 11 minutes. It repeats endlessly. But it's colorful, attractive, entertaining music. So, you very well might enjoy it if you haven't heard it already. It's the single Raff symphony you probably do know, if you know any of them at all. Now, number 6. Well, number 6 has a first movement marked Gelebt, Gestrapt, Gelitten, Gestritten, which is lived, struggled, complained, and sort of contested and argued, fought with. And then you have the second movement. That's the first 2 movements, by the way. The second movement is Gestorben, which we all know it's dead. It's a funeral march. You died. And then Umworben, which is courted or got married or something like that, It's an odd sort of structure, isn't it? But it kind of sounds like a Bach cantata, doesn't it? The first 2 movements, Gelebt, Gestrapt, Gelitten, Gestritten, Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Sagen. It's kind of that kind of thing. Anyway, the suite number 2 for orchestra is in the Hungarian Manor. I mean, Raff really got around, didn't he? And this is on the border, and then off der Pusta, on the Pusta, and then there's a march, and then a folk song with variations. I mean, again, the pattern is beginning to emerge, right? And then finally a Czardas. Oh, a Czardas. You got to have that. It's sort of the Hungarian equivalent of the tarantella in the Italian suite. Now, number 7. This is juicy. This is in the Alps. The Alpensymphony. Now, where have we heard that before? So you've got wandering in the high mountains and spending more time in the mountains, and then you're hanging out by the lake, and then there's a Schwingfest. It's got as the fest. There's always a fest for the finale. But this disc has Raff's really quite excellent orchestration of the Chaconne from the D minor violin partita by Bach, the orchestral arrangement, which also was pretty famous in its day, and it's been performed and recorded a few times since, unlike discs of miscellaneous Bach transcriptions. It's a fairly famous arrangement. And then the Evening Rhapsody. Very pretty. Now, I'm going to not bore you further, because then this will become a Raffian length talk. The last 4 symphonies, and here they are. That's numbers 8, 9, 10, and 11 are the four seasons. I kid you not. Number 8 is spring. Number 9 is summer. Number 10 is autumn. And number 11 is winter. And each movement has, of course, a programmatic title. And I will point out, however, that Raff has not forgotten his gnomes and dryads and nymphs and things here, because spring has a Walpurgisnacht, so you get, a Walpurgisnacht. You get like, evil spirits and things like that. And then you have in autumn, you have Gespensterregen, the dance of the spirits, the ghosty things. And then you have a people's hunt here, which is very, very halali and rast and jumping around and horns braying and all that stuff. And then you have the hunt of the elves in summer. So you have elves. And in the winter, he just says, the hell with it. It's the first snow, and it ends with a carnival. I mean, I think he ran out of ideas for winter. And indeed, these last four symphonies, despite their programmatic intent, are not as interesting, I think, thematically or orchestrally, as the earlier, fresher, sort of more inspired initial symphonies. I think by then Raff was kind of writing himself out. He was one of those composers who felt bound and determined to compose something every single day, no matter what. And he wrote tons and tons and tons of music. But some of it is really, really beautiful. And this series on Tudor, which, as I said, includes concertos and overtures and other things besides these symphonies, is wonderful. But the Raff box here is really a first-rate collection, and it's one that you're very likely to overlook. But if you are a serious collector of romantic orchestral music, then you simply have to have some of Raff. You don't have to have all of it. You may not want the whole box. You may not want to spend the money. But I think it's actually worth hearing. I really do. I think there's something rather personal and special, and it represents both musically and historically an important moment in the history of the German symphony. Raff has been written out of the history books, essentially. Nobody cares about him. Nobody cares about what he did. Nobody thinks it matters. But it did. It did matter. He was a major, major aspect of the repertoire from the second half of the 19th century in German symphonic music. And so he doesn't deserve to be ignored. That is our Raff Talk. I hope that you've enjoyed this little chat. If you did, please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just remember, keep on listening. The amount of music that there is to discover that's been recorded that you'll never hear in concert is practically limitless. And Raff is one of those guys who you may be very pleased that you get to know. Thank you, and take care.